I don't want this to get back to my students, but you'll notice in the title that I used an objective case pronoun when I should have used a subjective case pronoun. I hope you can forgive me, but please don't tell anyone that happens to be in my classroom. Sadly for you, I am not a preacher, but a teacher, and a teacher of stories. I teach literature, and one of the lessons that is important to teach when approaching a story is that stories help us to see ourselves, to see humanity, to see our humanness, and in some cases, our inhumanness. When I teach Julius Caesar, I cannot help but draw parallels to that story in the way we treat others and the way we justify our despicable treatment of each other. Brutus, Caesar's friend and lover, joins the conspirators against Caesar, whom he loved, by convincing himself that it was for the greater good of the people that he too should put a sword into Caesar. So Caiaphas at the trial of Jesus justified his hate, his jealousy, and his evil design by convincing himself and others that this was for the good of the people, for the nation. Why should all die for the sake of one man? Was his rhetorical question. So we do just like noble Brutus, just like Caiaphas. We, with words and intrigue, attack those whom we deem unworthy. When I teach that sad love story of Romeo and Juliet, I note that Romeo was advised by his spiritual mentor, Friar Lawrence, that Romeo's love for Juliet was grown in haste and will end badly, and that he must slow down. Sadly, they end in death. How many of us have acted against our own better judgment and the better judgment of others, much wiser than ourselves, plunged on doing what we think is best? Great stories paint pictures of ourselves, and sometimes they are anything but flattering. And if they are true to life, true to what we are really like, they do not flatter us, for we are all evil in the inside, but we are loath to admit it or accept it. So it is with the parables of Jesus. And they were designed so that his listeners might see themselves and come home, come to the fullness of joy, and take part in the celebration. So I turn to Luke 15 and the three stories that Jesus told, the stories of the lost sheep. It's interesting that no other gospel writer except Matthew tells this story. The story of the lost coin and the story of the wayward sons, both unique to Luke. Jesus was talking to a specific group of people, and he was acting as an apologist. The accusation of Jesus is in Luke 15, verses 1 and 2, when Luke records that the tax collectors, those abhorrent financial crooks, and other sinners had drawn near to Jesus to hear him. But the Pharisees and scribes, I'm a scribe. I'm a teacher in Israel. And they complain by saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus tells these three stories in which he hopes that they will see themselves and come home, come to the place of celebration and joy. The first story of the lost sheep is familiar to us all, and though few, if any of us, can other than vicariously relate to the story, we can relate to the obvious meaning that the shepherd is distraught when he has lost one sheep, and joyous when he has found it, after a long night of difficult searching. All his hearers could relate to this story, and the lesson could hardly have been lost. The second story he tells the criticizing teachers and the pious is the story of the lost coin. And again, the troubled and diligent, active searching of the lady, the rightful owner of the coin, is emphasized, and the joy she shows when the lost coin is found. The symbolic parallel of the lost sheep and coin, as representing the sinners who were held in contempt, could not have been lost on those for whom Jesus told the stories. Neither could the symbolic connection of the shepherd and the woman as God searching for sinners been lost. But these two stories are not as complete as they could be. And he tells the third story for the purpose of driving home the parallel. The third story is in Luke 15. I'm reading from the New King James Bible, beginning with verse 11. A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me." So he divided to them his livelihood, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it. And let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf." But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I have never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots and killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. To the people standing at the moment listening, they could easily see that the younger son represented those tax collectors and sinners they despised. But did they see that they were the older son? Here I take pause. I am the youngest of 3 boys. Our father never wandered to a far country. He followed his godly father's guidance to a T, and he expected us to do the same. My oldest brother was just such a one, and I went to school on him. He was a hard worker and earned our parents' approbation for it. He was studious, graduated with honors from academy, and a respectable GPA from college. He was driven to do what his father wanted him to do. But my other brother was the opposite, and I studied them both and saw that my elder brother was the one to emulate. I had my fool's hill, but it was short-lived, and I, like the younger son in the story, came home, but I picked up where I had left off. In a figurative sense, I never left the farm, but I, like the elder brother in the story, am often home only in outward show and not in the joy of my Father's love. We can all see ourselves at one time or another as the younger son. But Jesus, in his everlasting, unfathomable love, was speaking to me, the scribe, the Pharisee, and calling me, begging me to come into the party and rejoice. Looking closely at the older son's reaction, I can see the truth about myself and hopefully repenting. Come home. What are older siblings often like? As I have watched them over the years as a teacher and watched my own brothers, I noticed some characteristics about older siblings. They usually want to live up to their parents' expectations. They want to please. They fear being a disappointment to their parents. They, like I, envied the younger sibling to some extent. But they are unable to break away. They, like I, complied with the agendas of pastors in our lives, with the agendas of our teachers, with the agendas of church leaders and parents. They, like I, called the lifestyle of the younger wild ones reprehensible and secretly wondered why we couldn't step out. Obedient and the obedient and dutiful lifestyle I have accepted is at times a burden, but I cannot throw it off. Service has become a slavery. I stayed home. I didn't wander. But yet I did not live a free life in my Father's home. Older sons are lost too. And it is hard to identify their lostness. They are obedient, dutiful, law-abiding, hardworking. People respect them, admire them, select them to be on committees, seek their advice, consider them to be model sons. Outwardly, they appear faultless. But when confronted with the Father's joy, the truth surfaces. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have served you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. Resentment, pride, unkind criticisms, selfish, condemning spirit. There is so much judgment and condemnation and prejudice among the saints. Frozen anger inside those of us who are concerned with avoiding sin. I know how diligently I have tried to be good, to be acceptable, to be likable, to be a worthy example. But with all this has come a moralistic intensity bordering on fanaticism that makes it difficult to feel at home in my Father's house. I have become less free, less spontaneous, less playful, and I am seen as self-righteous. I have tried so hard, and no one has killed the fatted calf for me. My response is condemnation and criticism, self-righteousness, hearing the dancing and the music. The elder brother becomes suspicious and calls a servant. Fear of being excluded. Jesus said, I have come that you might have joy and that it might be full. Joy and resentment and criticism cannot coexist. I want the young son, my younger brother, to come home, but in a way that fits my view of coming home. Eat the way I want them to. Dress the way I think they should. Take on the duties of a hard-working American. Everything but step into the banquet hall and join in the singing. Often and far too often, I envision myself as the younger brother come home and look with critical eye on the elder brother whose judgments I cannot condone. And my spirit of criticism keeps the elder brother at bay, the elder brother in me. I want him to stay without the banquet hall, no ring and no robe for him. My spirit has not been transformed by the spirit of my father. I am critical and unaccepting. There are many elder sons and elder daughters who are lost while still at home. And it is this lostness characterized by judgment and condemnation, anger and resentment, bitterness and jealousy that is so pernicious and so damaging to the human heart. The younger son's sin is obvious, but the elder sons have a cloak that makes their sins less apparent and therefore much harder to come home from. My spirit has not been transformed, but one thing is certain in all these stories. The Father is unlimited in his desire to have his sons come home. To say of them both, these are my sons, and these are my daughters, in whom I am well pleased. This is the spirit I long to possess. I too want to come home. Am I the elder brother, willing to let myself be found, to confess that I am no different than my younger brother in need of forgiveness? What I do know is that Father's heart is full to overflowing with a desire for me to come home. I must face the hardest choice, to trust or not to trust in God's all-forgiving love. Will I be able to sit at the table with the Lutherans on Thursday night, my younger brother? How can I come home from my lostness hidden in the cloak of right living when I am imprisoned in obedience and duty? I am confronted with deep rootedness of my lostness, and I realize that what Jesus said to Nicodemus is true of me. I must be born again. I must be born from above. And with God, all things are possible. I must believe, feeble though my belief is, that this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Our closing hymn is hymn number 458, More Love.